Hi, Myra here. Story time again. Back to continue our story of the dancing cats of Applesap. We are ready for chapter 3. Get comfy, everybody. Miss Tooney disliked children, but almost from the first day she found she didn't dislike Melba quite as much as the others. Shy as the most timid kitten, Melba came at first once a week, then twice, and then almost every day after school. She always ordered the same thing, a hot fudge sundae. Melba didn't make a fuss if the whipped cream came out like a noodle. She didn't examine her spoon to see that it was clean. She didn't talk much, and she was neat, so Miss Tooney didn't have to sponge off after her. Melba gave Miss Tooney someone besides the cats to complain to, and on her side Melba didn't mind listening. She was a good listener, even if her throat clamped shut when she tried to say something back. Luckily, Miss Tooney wasn't interested in answers. Here's another picture. "The rudeness of that man goes beyond my understanding," Miss Tooney would complain, but softly so her voice wouldn't carry into the back room. She didn't like to admit it, but she was a bit frightened of Mr. Jiggs herself. "Never a pleasant word, never a good morning or good night, and when I offered a suggestion for improving this miserable store, he tells me to mind my own business. Well, and what is my business if it isn't this store?" "You be careful of him," she warned Melba. "He's a sick man. He doesn't have natural feelings for people. Sometimes," and here she would lower her voice further, "sometimes I think he beats the cats at night, after I've gone home. I've got no proof, of course, but they are often edgy and stirred up when I come back in the morning." Melba was afraid of Mr. Jiggs. She was afraid of Miss Tooney, too, so bitter and fierce, but she was more afraid of meeting up with Irma Herring and her sneering crowd coming home from school. "Hey, Rabbit," they would call if they saw her from across the street, and Melba, of course, would bolt just like a rabbit. "Hey, Owlface, where you going? Hey, Blind as a Bat." So Melba sat around Jiggs' drugstore for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, sometimes an hour. She just nibbled her hot fudge sundae and waited for the Super Queen crowd to pass by on their way home. Even after their noisy, high-spirited groups had gone, she stayed, licking her spoon and stroking the gnarled backs of nearby cats. She came to know a few friendly cats well, and the way those few perked up and ran over to say hello whenever she entered the store made Melba smile. Not all the cats liked to be touched, she found. Some hissed and jumped away when she put out a hand. Some cringed in terror. Butch was a cringer. He was a large, gray alley cat, of no particular distinction except that he had lost a front leg in a tragic street accident that had also bashed in the whole left side of his face. Through a single evil-looking slit, Butch eyed the world, and more than one customer had fled the store, to Miss Tooney's delight, when confronted by his horrible stare. But Butch was a sweet old fellow underneath, who would not think of raising a paw against anyone. Miss Tooney had found him crushed and lifeless on the store's front steps when she came to work one morning. Over many months she nursed him, and taught him in the bargain to eat the bright red cherries that decorated the tops of her sundaes. He adored them, and would take them only from her hand. When Melba offered him a cherry, Butch went into agonies of indecision. Shyly he edged toward her, limping awkwardly on his 3 legs. Still more shyly he waited, with lowered head, for her to make the first move. But when Melba reached out, he flinched and trembled as if he thought she was about to hit him. "He doesn't trust me," Melba said once, half to herself. "And why should he?" snapped Miss Tooney, who had been watching suspiciously out of the corner of her eye. "For all he knows, you might have been driving the truck that ran him down." One rainy day Mr. Jiggs launched himself up upon a tirade to end all tirades. He thundered and quivered with rage over the leaks, and tripped and swore over the cats, and he threatened to fire Miss Tooney, lock, stock, and barrel, if she didn't start sponging off this very minute. Then, warming up to the sound of his own voice, he turned on Melba, who was not doing a thing but biting her spoon a little too hard from nervousness. "I know your type," bellowed Mr. Jiggs at her terrified face. "Hanging around all day, taking up space. If I catch you reading my comic books without paying for them, I'll throw you out personally before you know what's hit." Miss Tooney laughed gaily after he stamped away. "Well," she said, "that was the worst fit in years. Something more than usual is bothering him, I'd say." Melba was shaking with fear. She looked pleadingly at Miss Tooney. "I didn't mean to take up space," she whispered, finding her voice now. "Good heavens!" snorted the old woman. "Don't pay any attention to him. He's batty. Look at the cats. They're not the least worried." Not only were the cats not worried, but several dozen of them had quietly followed Mr. Jiggs into the back room. There, if Melba and Miss Tooney could have seen, they curled up peacefully on the floor, surrounding his chair. And when, after throwing himself morosely down, Mr. Jiggs picked up his guitar to play again, cat ears all over the store stood up and quivered ecstatically with the first chord. Melba was silent for a minute. Then she swallowed hard and spoke up again. "Why doesn't Mr. Jiggs fix the leaks if they bother him so much?" she whispered. "Why does he allow the cats to live here?" Miss Tooney shrugged. "I don't ask," she said. "Who can tell what goes on in the mind of such a man? I guess most of the time he's too sunk down to notice what's happened in this store. And that's a good thing, too, or my cats would probably be dead by now." Melba nodded. "There's only so much room in the world for small, helpless things like cats," Miss Tooney went on. "My cats are the leftovers, the one who had gotten pushed out. This store is the last hope they have." How many cats do live here?" asked Melba, feeling a little better. "Round about 100 last count," said Miss Tooney. "They come and go, you know, depending on what's for dinner." "What is for dinner usually?" "Old ice cream, old Danish, old candy bars, that sort of thing. The mouse population isn't what it used to be around here." "I guess not," said Melba. She took a bite of hot fudge. "Where do they sleep?" "Well, where do you think?" snapped Miss Tooney, suddenly tired of the discussion. "I can't take them all home with me, can I?" Melba blushed and fumbled with her glasses. She finished her hot fudge sundae in silence and got up to go. But Miss Tooney had been watching her. Leaning abruptly across the counter, she barked out, "Why do you hang out here all the time? Haven't you got any friends or brothers or sisters?" "Only one brother," answered Melba, with downcast eyes, 5 years older than I am. "Well?" Miss Tooney's cat fur eyebrows reared suspiciously. "Well, he's crazy," muttered Melba. "One look at these cats and he'd go after his shotgun. He likes to shoot things." Miss Tooney frowned. "Let him try," she snarled. "My cats would tear him to pieces." The old woman leaned backward and placed 2 dried-up paws on her hips. "I stand by my cats," she declared with unexpected fury. "The whole rest of my family was dead and buried long ago." "Sorry to hear it," murmured Melba politely. Miss Tooney glared at her. "I'd take cats over people any time," she said proudly. "They're clean, they're honest, and they don't play games. If they don't want to be friends, they say so, and if they don't, they stay away. You always know where you stand with a cat." Miss Tooney spoke with such an accusing tone in her voice that Melba looked guiltily at her feet. Then she swallowed a huge gulp of air, gathered her courage, and spoke. "Miss Tooney," she said, as straight as she could, with her eyes still glued at her shoes, "Miss Tooney, I think you make the best hot fudge sundaes in the whole state of New York." But Miss Tooney had turned her back. Frowning even more fiercely, she stuck a movie magazine up in front of her face and refused to say another word. She was a grumpy old lady, all right, and why Melba should want to spend perfectly good time sitting around with her in a run-down, cat-ridden drugstore is something most people wouldn't understand. "Hey, wait a minute!" There goes Melba interrupting again. Her hand is still set and ready on the telephone to dial up the Guinness Book of World Records. "Hold up," she says, holding up a free hand. "That's a pretty black picture you just painted of me and Miss Tooney, and I've got to say something about it. You've got me gulping and cringing like a 2-year-old lost in the supermarket. I will not be called a scared rabbit. And you've made a bad mistake about Miss Tooney." Well, maybe she was a little grumpy, but it wasn't because of a man who ran off and left her. That's a groundless rumor that started up because people in Applesap couldn't think of any other reason why Miss Tooney was living alone. Whenever you see a woman who has decided to make her own way in life, immediately you find a whole lot of people who will tell you she's frustrated in love. It doesn't matter if it's not true. They'll whisper it around anyway and speculate about what happened. See, people have to talk, and one of the best subjects to talk about is other people. And if you can talk about other people so they end up sounding worse than you, that's the best of all because it raises you up in the world. I noticed these things. If Miss Toonie was grumpy, I guess I can see one reason why. There was all the Applesap whispering and snickering when the only thing she'd done was decided she was happier getting on by herself. I would have been angry too. In fact, that's my next point. All this cringing and gulping you have me doing doesn't get to the root of the matter. I was shy back then, all right, but underneath, when no one was looking, I got angry as much as any person. You should have seen how fierce I used to get up in my room. I would stamp around and tell people off to their faces. I must have pinched Irma Herring 500 times for not inviting me to her party. I was always pinching Irma. Even before the party came up, I had a good reason. She and her friends used to laugh at me in class when I couldn't answer a question. She told everyone I was stupid. But one day she figured a number problem wrong on the blackboard. It was my turn up next. I did it right in front of everyone. That made Irma furious. When I walked back to my desk, she reached out and pinched me hard. Then all her friends laughed as if she'd done something smart. I felt terrible. After that I was afraid of Irma, but underneath I was angry. When I found out she'd invited everybody except me to her party, I was even more afraid and more angry. I had such terrible feelings about Irma Herring's party that when the invitation did come, I didn't want to go. I didn't like parties back then anyway. There's nothing like a party for making a shy person stick out like a sore thumb. Everyone else is talking and running around together, and there's the one shy person over in a corner getting ignored and being afraid people will notice how ignored she is. Anyway, just so you know, I wasn't a cringer and a gulper all the way through. Let me tell you that I did go to Irma's party in the end, but not in her house. I went in my own room where no one else could see. I talked and ran around and was the star of the whole party, just the way Victor always is. When it came time to leave, I pinched Irma harder than ever and stamped off down the street. Maybe it sounds dumb to pretend things like that in your room, but it wasn't such a bad way to operate. I was getting practiced up, and when the real day come... Well, said Melba, cutting herself off, that comes in later. I don't mean to jump the gun. And now, could you talk a little more quietly while I make this phone call? No, I'm not nervous. Not at all. I just need some quiet. Chapter 4. Melba speaking up in favor of Miss Toonie's hot fudge sundaes changed things at that store. In the days that followed, Miss Toonie wasn't quite so grumpy. Once in a while she let Melba take the cats for walks, a few at a time, and she taught her how to sort the new magazines and newspapers that were delivered in bundles to the store. She showed her how to make hot fudge sundaes too, and how to twist the whipped cream can at such an angle and release the button at the same time that a dashing flourish of cream stood up straight on top, all ready to be crowned by the cherry. Meanwhile, Melba was finding out that she didn't have to blush and gulp whenever she wanted to ask Miss Toonie a question. She certainly didn't have to worry about talking to the cats, which she did a lot. In fact, those afternoons at the store became happier and longer, until Melba was spending hardly any time thinking in her room. Melba's mother noticed. "You've found a friend?" she asked hopefully. "Well, sort of," answered Melba, who was not sure even now that Miss Toonie could be counted as a friend. "It's that old grouch down at Jig's drugstore," volunteered Victor, who had somehow found out everybody else hates her. "That's because nobody else knows her very well," said Melba stoutly, but then she blushed so hard that her mother had to tell Victor to hush up and let people make friends where they found them. So Melba kept going to Jig's, and business being worse than usual there, she and Miss Toonie mostly had the place to themselves, except for Mr. Jiggs, of course, whose face, if they had noticed, was turning yellower and meaner by the hour. There he is, sitting at his desk with some kitties. Miss Toonie was right. Something more than usual was bothering the old man. Now he had taken to pacing up and down the back room, startling the cats at his heels with sudden turns and swerves. His tables were covered with open account books. Mr. Jiggs paced and figured and paced again. Finally, one dark morning, while the cats looked on reproachfully, he brought his fist down in the middle of one particularly dilapidated book and stalked out to the soda fountain counter to announce the bad news. "Closing down!" shrieked Miss Toonie. "But why? Why do you think?" he roared. Then he disappeared into the back room, took up his guitar, and struck dire chords. In shock, Melba asked the same question that afternoon. "But why? It's so nice here." By then Miss Tooney had composed herself. She answered her in her snappiest voice. "Well, why do you think? I suppose you think you've been supporting the store on your measly one Sunday a day. Well, you haven't been. Jiggs has gone broke. He's selling out." "But I thought you hated having customers in the store," cried Melba. Miss Tooney ignored her. "There's to be a dry cleaning establishment taking over next week," she fumed. "Think of it, right here where I'm standing now will be a rack of plastic covered clothes whose only aim in life is to get picked up on time." Miss Tooney sniffed such a fierce, sad sniff that her whiskers stood up on end. Melba stood up too, scattering cats. Her glasses slid sideways. "You can't sell out," she pleaded in a scared voice. "Jiggs' Drug Store has always been here. What would people do without Jiggs?" "Don't talk to me about it," said Miss Tooney. "Talk to him." She skewed her thumb in the direction of the back room. "And as for what people will do, well, they'll do what they do now, anyway. They'll go to the Super Queen. No one will even notice we've folded, you'll see." "I'll notice," explained Melba, blushing horribly. "And what about the cats? You can't take them all home with you. You said it yourself." Miss Tooney looked at the counter. "Very true," she agreed. "Poor cats, they will, I suppose, simply have to disperse." "No, they won't. They won't go. These cats love you. They're your family, remember?" "Cats are cats," said Miss Tooney with a brave wave of her hand. "They'll go. They'll go off to somebody else who can feed them." She groped for her handkerchief and made a last desperate effort to look fierce behind it. Now Melba shut her lips and looked down at a worn place under the counter where hundreds of thoughtless feet had scraped and gouged the brittle wood. Cats had been there too. Fuzzy strands of cat fur were snagged on splinters. "He can't do this to you." "He can do it," answered Miss Tooney. "It's his store." "No, it isn't," said Melba, low and threatening as a cornered cat's growl. "But so sorry." But her eyes were filled up with tears. In a minute she knew she would have to run away to hide them. That made her angrier, because how many times can you pinch people like Irma Herring up in your room without realizing it doesn't prove a thing? They don't know the difference. They go on talking or eating dinner or whatever they are doing in real life, and they don't feel the tiniest prick of outrage, not the lightest drop of a tear. They go on, thought Melba, turning her head to look, playing a guitar as if nothing terrible were happening at all. Suddenly Melba was running, but it wasn't out the front door. She was rounding the entrance into the back room, and even before she got there she was yelling at Mr. Jiggs. "You spineless man," she yelled, giving him at last a solid dose of his own medicine. "How can you sit here playing that guitar while our store goes down the drain? There are people who depend on this store, and you're not even trying to save it. You don't even care." Then, before Mr. Jiggs, staggering up from his chair, could throw her out, shy Melba Morris stamped out of the store herself, right past Miss Tooney and all the cats. Everybody staring. That's the end of chapter 4. Stick around and catch me in the next video for our continuation of The Dancing Cats of Applesap. Thanks for watching, everybody. Meow for now.